Hey everyone! Welcome to my channel, where we dive into the world of books and novels. If you're new here, pause the video, go to my channel, and watch the first part of Jumana novel so you can understand the story. This is the second part, called Ababil. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new content. Let's get started. Dive into the video. Not know what wrong he had done to his master to deserve such a reprimand, so he did not move from his spot and stood there for a while, unsure of what to do. Come on! He awkwardly climbed up to the edge of the window, and just before he jumped out and distanced himself, he looked at his master and made a sound that resembled the cooing of a lost dove. The child, who understood his intention, said, "No." He jumped from the window and began to walk away at an extremely slow pace, as if he wanted to give his master time to reconsider. However, his master did not retract his decision and continued to watch him with harsh eyes until he was out of sight. Ababil had not yet reached the age where he could fly well or defend himself against any danger he might encounter, even if it was a minor threat. He was still weak due to his young age, and any confrontation with a regular dog or a wild one could pose a fatal danger to him. Therefore, he hid after every 2 steps he took, carefully observing his path before he resumed walking once again. Since he had no one to go to that night, he decided to go to Taj. Although he feared walking alone in the dark forest, he had no other choice. He managed to reach there at sunrise, and perhaps due to the very faint light that was seeping through the thick leaves of the tall trees in the dark forest, Ababil was able to break the barrier of fear and enter. The floating fog in the air made visibility difficult, and even though someone was approaching him carefully, Ababil was able to detect those steps, so he hid inside a hollow in the trunk of one of the trees while waiting for the danger to pass. A long time passed before Ababil felt safe and decided to continue on his way again. However, as soon as he left his hiding spot and took 3 steps toward the castle, he saw before him a terrifying thing that made him wish with all his heart that he had stayed hidden and not come out. He was standing face to face with a spotted jaguar, one of the predatory animals that once inhabited the dark forest. Its slender shape and long, agile legs made the idea of fleeing impossible for Ababil. The spotted jaguar crouched on its 4 legs, focused its eyes directly on its light meal, and moved its long tail as if giving itself the signal to attack. As for Ababil, he felt he had no choice but to scream as loudly as his delicate, sharp voice, akin to the mew of a kitten searching for its mother's breast. Of course, he didn't mean to scare the jaguar. He screamed to call for Taj. Taj did not come to save him, perhaps because the sound didn't reach her, but oddly, as soon as Ababil finished that scream, the predatory animal flinched, its fierce features transforming into a scared expression as it cautiously retreated and then turned and fled at full speed. Ababil continued on his way, proud of himself, believing he had scared away the jaguar with his scream, but of course, he was mistaken. If only he had turned around at that moment, he would have seen Tara standing firmly, looking angrily toward the jaguar, which had frightened and fled. When he reached the midpoint of the forest where the castle was located, his orange feathers had become dirty from dust and grime, and he was panting from the fear, danger, and the long distance he had walked. The first one to see him at that moment was Sabi, who let out a high whinny. "What's wrong?" Taj asked, opening one of the castle windows. Sabi pointed his nose toward the ground and said, "Look who has come." Taj jumped out the window with the agility of a young fairy. "What happened? Has something happened to your master?" she asked as she shook him. Due to extreme fatigue, Ababil did not respond to that question, so Sabi went to store some cold water in his mouth, then returned and poured it over the phoenix to revive him. "Why did you come alone and leave your master there?" He tried to explain what he wanted to say using his wings, head, and tail, along with sounds he emitted from time to time that meant nothing. When he finished, Sabi asked, "Did you understand anything from all these gestures, my lady?" "I think," and then she whispered before disappearing, "Take care of him in my absence." The sky was dark, and all the villagers of Al-Jassasa were asleep at that moment, except for the child who was awake, circling around himself in the empty space of the room like a tiger trying to escape from the hunter's cages. He initially tried to escape through the window, but it was too narrow for him to squeeze through. He attempted to open the door, but it was locked from the outside with a latch. He thought about passing through the wall, but he was still sad. While in that desperate state, he remembered something that made him jump up and shout like a madman. "I can bring my mother back to life." He remembered that phrase his mother always said to him after telling him a bedtime story, the phrase that made him close his eyes upon hearing it and analyze each of its words carefully. "Remember throughout your life, my son, that the Lord answers the call of the caller when he calls upon him." Then his mind thought this way: if the Lord answers answers the call of the caller when he calls upon him, as my mother always said, then I can bring her back to life if I ask the Lord for that. My mother wouldn't lie to me. She was always truthful with me throughout her life. So he raised his hands and prayed quietly to himself, "O Lord, bring my mother back. Bring her back to life." He repeated the prayer in his heart several times, and when he finished, he needed to find some way to escape from the witch's house and go to the cemetery where the Lord would answer his prayer, and he would find his mother, Jumana, waiting for him there. He stood on his feet, a happy smile etched on his innocent face, indicating his optimism. He began to feel joy replacing his sadness and felt a fire igniting in his body again. He stepped back 2 paces, looked defiantly at the wall, and uttered, "Abracadabra, I am the one who does as said." Then he dashed toward the wall with all his might. And because it was late and no one in the village was awake at that time, and not knowing the path he should take to get to the cemetery, he stopped at one of the animal pens to ask, "Is there anyone I can ask something?" A voice came from inside the pen. "Are you a lost donkey?" "No, I'm not a donkey," he answered. The voice questioned again, "What kind of animal are you then?" "I'm not an animal. You seem like a lost and drunken donkey." Then he heard 2 voices laughing, and he said, "I wanted to ask about where the dead go." The laughter stopped, and he began to hear the sound of hooves coming toward him from inside the pen. "Why do you ask about that, lost donkey?" Then a donkey named Samri emerged, with a small triangular head and long ears standing upright. Samri stopped for a moment, looking curiously at the creature, as if trying to comprehend the situation. The child said, "See, I'm not a donkey." When Samri saw that creature speaking to him, he brayed loudly as if he was being dragged to his doom, and during that loud braying, another voice came from inside the pen saying, "What's wrong with you, Samri? Did a pack of predatory beasts attack you?" Samri stopped braying for a moment. "It's a human, Camaria. Come and see." Camaria said, "Is this the first time you see a human?" "Yes, it's the first time I see a human who can talk." "What do you mean?" "Come and you'll understand." And when Camaria arrived, she said, "Why is that human donkey staring at us like that?" The child intervened, saying, "I came to ask something." Camaria paused for a moment, trying to interpret the ability of that creature to speak their language, and when she couldn't find an explanation for this phenomenon, she brayed louder than her husband had just moments earlier, and she didn't stop until her husband kicked her in the belly. "Be quiet, Camaria, and let us understand," Camaria asked, fearful. "But how can this human donkey talk like us?" "I don't have time to explain, as I'm in a hurry." Camaria cautiously asked, "Did you lose your way?" "Something like that," he replied. "I want to know where the dead go after they die." "To the slaughterhouse," the Samaritan said. "They take him to the slaughterhouse, skin him, and make bags and clothes from his skin, and so on, until he was interrupted by Camaria, who cut into her husband's speech. He means something else. He wants to know where the dead go after their death, and the answer is either to paradise or to hell." At that moment, a white owl that had been resting on a nearby tree branch, watching and listening to what was happening, intervened. "He means the cemetery, doesn't he, boy?" The child repeated, "The cemetery?" "Yes," said the white owl, "where the dead are buried beneath the earth." He spoke as if talking to himself. "Yes, I remember there was a lot of dirt. Okay, follow me, I will guide you to the place." Despite the many graves that were almost identical in length and width, he was able to precisely identify his mother's grave without any effort, guided only by the jasmine scent still wafting from her grave. He sat there waiting for her, fully convinced that God would answer his prayer and bring her back to him. The white owl asked, "What brought you to the cemetery at this time?" "I came for my mother. She will come out of here soon, but the dead do not wake up." He didn't argue with her, and continued to stare intently at the grave. The white owl said, "Tell me, what makes you think your mother will come out of her grave?" "She used to tell me that God answers the call of the caller if he calls upon him, and you called him to bring her back to life. That's why you came here, isn't it?" He nodded his head, and she asked, "May I stay with you?" "Why do you want to stay?" "Because I have never seen someone come out of their grave before." "It's all right," he mumbled. "Stay."